In the soft, golden light of JFK Airport's morning rush, the air felt too clean, too rehearsed. People moved like they always did, dragging carry-ons, checking phones, adjusting scarves, all performing the quiet dance of travel. Yet somewhere between the sunlight and the hum of announcements, something colder settled in. Elias stood near the boarding gate, dressed in a crisp suit that carried more stories than its fabric could hold. He wasn't doing anything remarkable, just waiting, calmly, silently. But his presence drew a look, one that burned through the calm. Margaret's glance wasn't accidental. It was polished, entitled, and faintly rehearsed. The kind of look that had been perfected over years of unchallenged superiority. She didn't need to say much. Her eyes did the speaking. They questioned his place there, his right to belong, his right to stand unbothered. Elias caught it, not with surprise, but with that tired recognition known only to those who've seen this scene too many times. He didn't react. He didn't need to. The silence between them grew louder, absorbing the curious stares of nearby passengers. A stewardess noticed but looked away, pretending to busy herself with the check-in tablet. That was how it always started. Not with shouting, not with confrontation, but with glances that sliced softer than knives. As the intercom buzzed a boarding delay, the crowd murmured, restless. Margaret sighed audibly, rolling her eyes toward Elias. He met her stare for a brief, unflinching second, and in that second, something shifted. The silence wasn't submission anymore. It was dignity, a quiet refusal to bow. The morning carried on, but beneath the routine rhythm of travel, the air had already changed, heavy, divided, waiting. The boarding line moved like a river, slow, impatient, full of sighs and screens. Elias stood behind Margaret, close enough to hear the clipped rhythm of her heels, far enough to respect the distance she'd already claimed. When the attendant called for boarding, Margaret surged forward, her bag brushing against him as if by accident, though the small, intentional pause that followed said otherwise. "Excuse me," Elias said softly, his voice calm, almost polite. She didn't turn. "I believe I was ahead of you." Her tone carried the kind of certainty only privilege could make sound natural. The gate agent looked up, confused, eyes darting between them. For a second it seemed she might intervene, but then something changed. She lowered her gaze, pretending to check the scanner instead. The air tightened. "It's fine," Elias murmured, stepping back just enough to let Margaret pass. The movement was small, quiet, but heavy. It wasn't surrender. It was survival, the practiced restraint of someone who had lived this scene before. Margaret walked on, the corners of her lips curling into the faintest smirk, unaware that the quiet around her had turned into a silent witness. A man behind Elias shook his head. A woman whispered something under her breath. The discomfort rippled, soft but visible. As Elias handed over his ticket, the gate agent hesitated. Her fingers trembled slightly when she scanned his pass. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Guilt flickered. Unspoken apology hung in the air. Elias gave a faint nod, as if forgiving her for something she hadn't dared to name. When he stepped through the gate, the sound of his shoes against the floor felt like punctuation. One man's quiet dignity pressing against a world built on small, everyday humiliations. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft gold, the hum of the engine covering small talk and seatbelt clicks. Margaret adjusted her silk scarf, glancing sideways, pretending not to look. Yet the disdain in her eyes was deliberate. "Figures they let anyone in first class these days," she murmured, just loud enough for her words to find a target. Elias looked ahead. His face was calm, but his breath was measured, deliberate. The kind a man learns after years of swallowing insults that don't deserve answers. For a moment, silence. Then softly he said, "Not everything needs proving. It wasn't defensive. It was quiet authority, the kind that exposes weakness without ever pointing to it." Margaret froze. She hadn't expected a reply, especially not one that made her feel smaller without raising a single voice. "Excuse me?" she asked, voice tightening, reaching for outrage to cover discomfort. He turned his head, eyes meeting hers briefly. "You heard me," that was all. Then he went back to his book, the one she'd assumed he wouldn't read, thick, dense, leather-bound. The flight attendant nearby shifted uneasily. A man across the aisle looked up, pretending to check his phone, but staying tuned. A small tremor rippled through the row, not noise, but awareness. Margaret's smirk faltered. She leaned back, crossing her arms, eyes fixed on the window. The silence after his words felt heavier than confrontation. A silence that made her own voice sound cheap in hindsight. Elias closed his eyes briefly, letting the hum of the aircraft drown the memory of every similar moment, in boardrooms, interviews, polite dinners. This one wasn't new, but something about this silence felt different. It was public. It was recorded in their stares, and it was hers to sit with. The engines roared, and the plane lifted into a sky that looked calm, but wasn't. Margaret shifted in her seat, her perfume sharp in the recycled air. She didn't look at him, not directly, but her body angled away, her movements deliberate. She tugged her jacket tighter, as if sharing space with him required protection. Elias rested his hands on his lap, fingers still, eyes tracing the clouds outside. His reflection in the window looked tired, not from travel, but from the weight of quiet wars fought in public spaces where silence was his only defense. Margaret broke it first. "I usually don't sit this close," she muttered, half to herself, half to the world. He didn't answer. The calm in his silence wasn't surrender, it was control, the kind that unsettled people used to being heard. She exhaled, frustrated. "You could at least say something. It's rude to just sit there." He turned slowly, his gaze steady. "Sometimes saying nothing is the only way to stay polite." Her mouth opened, then closed. The words stung because they weren't angry. They were true. Around them, a few passengers glanced up, pretending to be absorbed in their screens, yet aware. The air thickened. Elias leaned back, adjusting his watch. "We'll be fine," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "We always are." Margaret frowned, unsure if he meant the flight or something deeper. Her chest tightened. The hum of the cabin filled the gap between them, a noise too familiar, the world pretending not to hear what's happening right in front of it. He looked out again, calm as ever. She shifted once more, realizing too late that her discomfort wasn't about space. It was about being seen without being superior. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, steady and low, like the sound of something holding its breath. Margaret adjusted her seatbelt, sighing loud enough for the nearest flight attendant to hear. "Excuse me?" she said. Her voice dipped in polite irritation. "This seat feels smaller than I remember." "I can't stretch my legs." The attendant smiled nervously. "I'm sorry, ma'am. First-class seats are standard size. Would you like an extra pillow or—" "It's fine," she interrupted, glancing sideways. "I just wish I wasn't cramped." Her tone lingered on the last word like it meant more than space. Elias stayed silent, eyes fixed on the screen ahead, pretending to care about the safety video. The words didn't surprise him. They never did. He'd been hearing them his whole life, just dressed in better clothes. Margaret shifted again, pressing the call button. "Miss," she said sweetly, "I think he's taken part of my armrest." The attendant hesitated, looked between them. Elias slowly pulled his arm back, the leather creaking beneath him. The attendant whispered, "I'm so sorry, sir." He nodded once. "You don't need to apologize." His voice was calm, measured, like someone choosing every word as if it could be used against him. Margaret smiled tightly. "Well, it's just about personal space. I'm sure you understand." He turned slightly, met her eyes. "Perfectly," her smile faltered. The word held something she couldn't name, too steady, too knowing. She turned back to her magazine, pretending to read. Narration slid between the silence. Every seat on that plane was built the same size, but only one of them had to shrink to fit inside it. A few rows ahead, someone's phone chimed. The small sound felt louder than it should have been. The attendant passed by again, placing a napkin beside Elias, an unspoken apology written in gesture. He didn't look up. He'd learned long ago, grace wasn't about staying quiet. It was about surviving the noise. The engine's hum folded into a softer sound, like memory taking shape. Elias leaned back, eyes half closed. Margaret had gone quiet beside him, flipping her magazine without reading. But his silence wasn't peace. It was weight. He remembered another room. Glass doors, polished floors, voices that didn't rise but still pressed down. "Mr. Cole," someone had said once, smiling through his teeth. "We're just not sure you fit our company's image." He'd smiled then too, same way he was smiling now. Understood. He'd understood everything. The meetings he led but never got credit for. The decisions he made signed under someone else's name. His father's voice returned. Steady as it had been that night, he came home late, defeated. "Son," he'd said, placing a calloused hand on his shoulder, "respect won't save you." But lose it and they win twice. He hadn't replied then either, just nodded like he was nodding now, to no one. Margaret coughed lightly, breaking the thread. "You fly often?" she asked, tone casual, like small talk could erase the moment before. "Enough to remember every face that pretended not to see me," he said. She blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't mean, I know." He turned toward the window. "You never do." The silence after felt longer than it should have. Even the air seemed to hesitate between them. He'd carried his past like luggage that never got checked. Every slight folded neatly inside. Every lesson zipped shut. The plane shook briefly, a pocket of turbulence. Margaret gripped her seat. Elias didn't move. Some people fear falling, he thought. Others fear remembering where they came from. The hum returned. So did his stillness. The plane trembled, a quick, hard drop that sent cups rattling and hands gripping armrests. Margaret's fingers clutched the seat, her voice cutting through the startled murmurs. "Oh, God. If the pilots like you, we're doomed." The words fell sharper than the turbulence itself. For a second, even the air froze. A few passengers turned, but their eyes dropped as quickly as they rose. No one spoke. Elias didn't flinch. He simply exhaled, slow, steady. His hand rested calmly on the tray, wedding ring catching the dim light. "Excuse me?" His voice was soft, almost gentle. She swallowed, realizing too late what she'd said. I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." He turned his gaze toward her, not angry, just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from sleepless nights, but from a lifetime of swallowing moments like this. "You think control belongs to you because you're used to holding it," he said quietly. "But it's funny. How you lose it the moment things shake." Her lips parted, but no sound came. The plane steadied. The captain's calm voice came through the speakers, announcing clear skies ahead. No one clapped this time. Not a word was spoken. Margaret sat still, eyes forward. The color drained from her face. The attendants avoided her row. Elias looked out the window again, his reflection faint against the glass, composed, unbroken. He'd learned long ago that silence could bruise louder than words. Across the aisle, a man shifted uncomfortably. Another looked down at his phone. Yet the air had changed. Thicker, heavier, aware. Margaret tried to speak again, but he simply said without looking at her, "Don't. Just don't." The engines hummed on. So did the quiet reckoning. The silence stretched so long it began to hum. Margaret kept glancing around, expecting someone, anyone, to agree with her, to make her small laughter sound normal again. But the cabin stayed quiet. Even the air seemed to wait. Elias finally spoke, his voice low, firm, and calm enough to cut through the pretense. "Kindness isn't weakness," he said. "You'd be surprised how often people mistake the two." Margaret blinked, half a smirk tugging at her lips. "Oh, come on now. It was just a joke." He looked at her, steady, unblinking. "That's what people say when they realize everyone stopped laughing." Her face twitched, trying to recover composure. "You're taking this way too seriously?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and spoke softly to the flight attendant who hovered nearby. "Could you let the captain know Elias Monroe would like a quick word once we're stable?" The attendant froze for half a second, recognition flashing behind her eyes, then nodded. "Of course, sir," Margaret frowned. You know the captain?" Elias gave a faint smile. "No, but the captain knows the company that owns this plane." Her fingers gripped the armrest tighter. "What are you saying?" He didn't look at her. "I'm saying I've built the kind of business where I don't have to raise my voice to be heard." The plane began its early descent. The captain's voice came over the intercom, unusually formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a directive from the airline's executive office, we'll be landing sooner than expected." Margaret's nervous chuckle cracked. This can't be real." Elias finally looked at her, quiet, unreadable. "It's real enough." The engines softened. Justice had already landed. The wheels touched the runway with a soft thud, but no one moved. The air inside the cabin hung thick, heavier than before, heavier than silence itself. The intercom clicked, and then the captain's voice broke through, careful, measured, and almost reverent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we've made an unscheduled landing at the request of Mr. Elias Monroe." Heads turned. The name rippled through the cabin like electricity. Margaret froze mid-breath. The captain stepped out from the cockpit, smoothing his uniform, his eyes scanning the rows until they found Elias. "Sir," he said, voice steady, "your team has been notified. Transportation will be waiting on the tarmac. The crew extends our apologies for the inconvenience." Elias nodded once. No arrogance, no anger, just quiet acknowledgement. Margaret blinked hard as though trying to wake up. "Wait," she stammered. You're him? The one from Monroe Industries?" He turned toward her, the faintest trace of a sigh slipping through his composure. "You've read the name before," he said. "You just didn't expect it to belong to someone like me." Her face went pale. "I didn't mean... It's been a misunderstanding." He held her gaze. "No, it's been a pattern." The whispering passengers grew still again. Even the flight attendants looked unsure, respect colliding with shame. Margaret tried to laugh, but the sound cracked mid-air. "You could have just told me," she said, desperate, brittle. "I shouldn't have to," Elias replied quietly. "That's the point." He stood adjusting his jacket, dignity unshaken. The aisle parted for him, not out of fear, but recognition. Margaret's lips trembled, 1,000 words caught behind them. When he reached the door, he paused, looked back once. "The world doesn't change with noise," he said softly. "It changes when silence finally means something." And then he walked out, leaving only the sound of his footsteps, steady, final, and heavier than any apology. Margaret sat frozen, the color drained from her face. The hum of the engines was gone now, replaced by the slow, deliberate rhythm of footsteps, hers. The captain stood by the open door waiting. The crew didn't meet her eyes. No one did. The silence wasn't angry, and it was worse. It was aware. Elias remained seated, calm, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the cabin. Margaret turned to him, her voice a whisper. "You're really going to let them—" I said I was sorry. He looked at her, the kind of look that stripped words of their worth. "You meant every word," he said softly. "That's why sorry doesn't work here?" Her lips parted, searching for something to hold on to. Pride, denial, anything. "You don't understand." "I understand," he interrupted, his tone steady. "I've spent my life understanding people like you, but I'm done carrying their comfort." She stood, trembling slightly, clutching her bag like a shield. The aisle stretched out before her, long, exposed, merciless. Every step she took sounded louder than the last. Click, click, click. Each heel strike was a verdict, echoing through the cabin. The passengers who had once laughed, or looked away, now stared, not at Elias, but at her. The woman who had spoken so freely was now wordless. When she reached the exit, she turned back once, desperate. "Is this what you call justice?" Elias's reply was almost a whisper, yet it filled the air. "No, this is consequence," she swallowed, eyes glistening. No one moved to comfort her. No one clapped. No one dared. The captain gestured quietly, and she stepped out into the harsh sunlight. Her shadow vanished down the stairs. Elias exhaled once, slow, controlled, unbroken. Justice had spoken, softly enough to echo forever. The glow from her phone was the only light left in the room. Margaret sat on the edge of her couch, scrolling through what used to be her world. The smiling photos, the conferences, the polished statements. Now every post beneath her name was fire. Disgusting. Entitled, "This you?" Each word dug into her skin like truth she'd tried too long to bury. Her phone buzzed again, a message from a colleague. She opened it, but it wasn't comfort. "HR asked for a meeting tomorrow. Might be best if you don't come in." She stared at it numb. Silence filled the room, thick and cruel. She typed something, deleted it, typed again. Nothing sounded right. Nothing sounded human enough. Her reflection on the dark screen caught her, eyes swollen, hair undone. For once, she didn't recognize the woman looking back. "I said I was sorry," she whispered, but even the air refused to answer. Outside, a group of kids laughed, their voices carrying through the night. The sound felt foreign, like joy belonged to another world now. She checked her email. Sponsors pulled out, friends unfollowed, messages turned blue unread. Silence was louder than any backlash. It wasn't public anymore. It was personal. Margaret placed the phone face down, her hands trembling. She wanted to cry, but tears wouldn't come. Only that memory of Elias's voice lingered. Calm, unbroken. You meant every word. The internet moved on, but her name didn't. It sat beneath headlines like a stain that refused to fade. And in the quiet, she finally understood. The silence she once used to humiliate now lived with her. It was patient, permanent, punishing. The city stretched beneath him like a quiet witness. From his office window, Elias could still see the distant line of the airport, the place where it all began and ended without a single shout. He stood there for a while, watching the clouds drift across the glass, their soft movement steadier than the noise that had followed online. His phone buzzed again. Another article, another interview request. He turned it face down. "Sir, the board is ready," his assistant said softly from the doorway. He nodded but didn't move. "Do they know?" "They've seen the footage," she replied. "Everyone has." He gave a faint smile. "Then there's nothing left to explain," she hesitated. "They said, the way you handled it, it changed things." Elias exhaled, his tone calm. "Change doesn't come from noise. It comes from stillness people can't forget." She left quietly, the door closing behind her. For a moment he thought of his mother, her hands always rough from work, her voice soft even in anger. Dignity is louder than anger. Those words stayed with him like air. He sat at the table, the boardroom silent except for the low hum of the city outside. Someone cleared their throat, ready to speak, but Elias raised a hand gently. "No need," he said. "We already said enough without words." Across the glass, his reflection stared back, calm, grounded, unshaken. Justice hadn't arrived with force. It had landed softly, the way rain falls, unnoticed until everything feels cleaner. He leaned back, eyes steady. "Let's move forward," he said, quietly, and in that stillness, justice breathed. Not seen, not celebrated, but alive.